Robert had always dreamed of living in a peaceful neighborhood, where the air smelled fresh and children played safely on the streets. After years of hard work in the city, he finally found a small house by a beautiful lake. The house was perfect, a cozy porch, a small garden, and a clear view of the water. This place promised the quiet life Robert wanted. The neighborhood was called Lakeview Estates. It was quiet and clean, with wide streets and friendly neighbors. Most people there liked calm and order. The neighborhood was managed by a homeowners association, or HOA. The HOA made rules to keep the place nice, like how houses should look, where people could park, and what time trash trucks could come. Robert thought this was fair. Rules helped keep the neighborhood beautiful and peaceful. But soon, he learned that not everyone agreed on the rules, or how they should be followed. Karen was the president of the HOA board. She was a middle-aged woman who had lived in Lakeview Estates for almost 20 years. Karen took her job seriously. Maybe a little too seriously. She liked to be in charge and was known for being strict. She always had opinions on how things should be done and was not shy about sharing them. Most neighbors tried to stay on Karen's good side. She could be sharp and loud when she thought someone was breaking the rules. Robert, however, was not easily pushed around. He believed in fairness, and he didn't like being told what to do without good reason. The problem started with parking. Lakeview Estates had rules about parking. Some areas were for guests, some for residents, and some spots were reserved for people with disabilities. Robert's house had a small driveway, but the rules said cars should only be parked on the street in certain places. Karen insisted that Robert park his car in a specific spot near the lake. According to her, that spot was reserved for him. Robert thought it was strange. The spot near the lake was far from his house and hard to reach when carrying groceries or bags. His own driveway was close and empty most of the time. The rules were not very clear about whether he had to park near the lake or by his house. Robert tried to talk to Karen one day. "Karen," he said politely, "I think I can park in front of my house. It's empty, and it's easier for me." Karen shook her head firmly. "No, Robert. The rule says you must park in your assigned spot. That's near the lake. Everyone else follows the rules." Robert frowned. "I have read the rules. It doesn't say that exactly. I think I am okay to park here." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'm telling you, you have to park where I say. If you don't, you're breaking the rules." Robert wanted to avoid trouble, but he also didn't want to give up his spot in front of his house. It made no sense to him. Days went by, and Robert continued parking in front of his house. Each time, he found a small note on his windshield from Karen or someone on the HOA board. The note said things like, "Please park in your assigned spot," or "This is a warning." Robert ignored the notes. He thought they were unfair. One morning, Robert woke up early to enjoy the sunrise by the lake. He loved the calm water and the soft sounds of birds. As he walked outside, he saw Karen standing near his car, arms crossed. "Robert," she said, "you are still parking in the wrong place. You need to move your car now." Robert smiled calmly. "Karen, I've tried to explain. This spot is closer to my house and does not block anyone. I don't see the problem." Karen's face grew red with frustration. "You are breaking the rules. I'm calling the police." Robert was surprised. "The police? For parking?" Karen nodded and pulled out her phone. "Yes, this is not about you. It's about following the rules. I'm doing my job." Robert watched as Karen made the call. Neighbors started to peek out of their windows, curious about the noise. When the police arrived, Robert calmly explained his side. The officers looked at the HOA rules and spoke to both Robert and Karen. After some discussion, the officers said there was no clear rule about his parking spot. Karen was unhappy. She argued with the officers, but they said they could not force Robert to move. Robert felt relieved but also worried about the tension this was causing in the neighborhood. After the police left, Karen did not give up. She continued sending notes and making complaints. The neighbors started to take sides. Some felt Karen was too strict, while others thought Robert was ignoring the rules. Robert knew this small parking problem was becoming bigger than he wanted. But he had a quiet hope, maybe the rules could be changed, or maybe people would see that fairness mattered more than power. After the police left that morning, Robert felt a mix of relief and worry. He hoped the matter would end there, but he knew Karen was not the kind to give up easily. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with quiet conversations. Some neighbors whispered to each other about the fight between Robert and Karen. Many were curious but also worried about the growing tension. Robert decided to take a more official approach. He wanted to understand the HOA rules better and make sure his rights as a homeowner were clear. He took out the HOA rule book, a thick folder filled with pages of regulations about the neighborhood. It looked serious but sometimes hard to understand. Robert spent evenings reading through the rules. He found sections about parking, property maintenance, noise, and community behavior. The parking rules talked about assigned spaces but didn't clearly say where every resident had to park. There were reserved spots for visitors and special parking for people with disabilities. But no one seemed to have a parking spot assigned near the lake like Karen said. Robert was confident. The rules did not support Karen's claim. He decided to ask the HOA board for a formal meeting to talk about the parking problem. At the next HOA meeting, Robert stood in front of the room filled with neighbors, the board members, and Karen sitting at the head of the table. The atmosphere was tense. Karen looked sharp and ready to defend her position. Robert spoke clearly and politely. "I have read the HOA rules carefully. There is no clear rule that says I must park near the lake. I think I am following the rules by parking near my house, where it is empty and safe. I want the board to clarify the rules so everyone understands." Karen shook her head, her voice firm. "The rules are clear to me, and I represent the board's decision. You are causing problems by ignoring the rules." A few neighbors murmured in the room. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. The board chair, Mr. Wilson, an older man with kind eyes, raised his hand for silence. "Let's be calm," he said. "We want to make sure the rules are fair and clear. Robert, we will review the parking section again and make a decision soon." Robert felt a small hope. Maybe the board would see reason. But Karen was not done. After the meeting, she pulled Robert aside. "You are making the neighborhood uncomfortable," she said. "You need to follow the rules, or there will be consequences." Robert nodded but said calmly, "I just want to live peacefully here, Karen." Karen frowned and walked away. That evening, Robert returned home to find another note on his car. This one was different. It was an official-looking letter from the HOA. The letter said Robert had violated the parking rules and was fined $100. Robert was shocked. He had tried to follow the rules and even asked for clarification. The fine felt unfair. He called the HOA office the next day and asked to speak to Mr. Wilson. "Mr. Wilson," Robert said, "I read the rules, and I don't believe I am breaking them. I want to appeal this fine." Mr. Wilson sounded tired but polite. Robert, I understand. We will review your appeal in the next board meeting. Please be patient. Robert hung up, feeling frustrated but still hopeful. Meanwhile, Karen continued to spread her opinion among neighbors. She told them Robert was not respecting the community rules. Some neighbors believed her, while others thought she was too harsh. One neighbor, Mrs. Clark, came to Robert's door one afternoon. "Robert," she said kindly, "I think Karen is being too strict. You're not the only one confused about the parking. Maybe you should talk to more neighbors." Robert smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Clark. I want everyone to feel comfortable here." Robert began talking quietly with other neighbors. Many said they had similar problems with unclear rules or strict enforcement. Some even shared stories about Karen's tough attitude. Robert felt a new purpose. He wanted to help the neighborhood come together, to make the rules clearer and fair for everyone. A week later, the HOA held another meeting. This time, the room was full. Many neighbors had come to listen. Robert spoke again. "The rules should help us all, not cause fights. I ask the board to work with the community to fix the parking rules and respect people's needs." Karen was angry. She said, "Rules are rules. We must follow them to keep order." But Mr. Wilson nodded to Robert. "We will form a committee to review the rules. Your input is important." The room broke into quiet applause. Robert felt proud but knew the fight was not over. He still faced Karen's opposition and the fine hanging over him. But for the first time, he saw a chance for change one step at a time. After the meeting where the board agreed to review the rules, Robert felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this time, things would change for the better. But he also knew that Karen would not give up her fight so easily. A few days later, Mr. Wilson called Robert with good news. "Robert, we have formed a small committee to review the parking rules and other regulations. You are invited to join us." Robert was glad to be part of the group. He wanted to help make the neighborhood fair for everyone. The committee included 3 other residents: Mrs. Clark, a kind older woman who cared about the community; Mr. Sanchez, a quiet man who had lived in Lakeview Estates for 10 years, and Karen. Robert felt nervous when he saw Karen's name on the list. He knew she was determined to keep control. Their first meeting was held in the community center, a simple building near the lake with big windows that let in sunlight. Robert arrived early and sat down, waiting for the others. Soon, Mrs. Clark and Mr. Sanchez arrived, greeting Robert warmly. But when Karen walked in, the room seemed colder. She smiled politely but looked serious. Mr. Wilson, acting as the committee chair, spoke first. "Thank you all for coming. Our goal is to look carefully at the rules and make suggestions that work for everyone. Let's start with parking." Karen quickly spoke up. "I believe the rules are clear. Assigned parking spots help avoid confusion and keep the neighborhood safe. Residents must follow these spots." Robert listened carefully. "Karen, I agree that clear rules are good. But the current rules do not say exactly where assigned spots are. This causes confusion." Mrs. Clark nodded. "Yes, I think the rules need to be clearer and fair to everyone." Mr. Sanchez added, "We want to keep the neighborhood peaceful, not cause fights." Karen frowned. "We must follow the existing rules. Changing them now will cause more problems." The meeting became tense. Robert wanted to stay calm. "Karen, maybe we can find a middle ground. We could mark parking spots clearly, so no one is confused. We could also allow some flexibility for residents who need to park closer to their homes. Karen shook her head. That is not how the rules work. Mr. Wilson raised his hand. Let's stay respectful. This is a discussion, not a battle. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They talked about parking, noise, and how the HOA could communicate better with neighbors. At the end, the committee agreed to review the rules and suggest clear parking spots. But Karen was unhappy with the idea of change. Robert left the meeting feeling mixed. The progress was slow, but at least something was moving. Over the next weeks, the committee met several times. Robert worked with Mrs. Clark and Mr. Sanchez to write clear, simple rules about parking. They suggested marking spots on the street and allowing residents to request special exceptions. Karen continued to argue against most of their ideas. She often sent emails to the board saying the rules were fine as they were. One afternoon, Robert was outside his house when Karen walked up. "Robert," she said sharply, "you think you're helping the neighborhood, but you are making it harder to manage." Robert looked at her calmly. "Karen, I want to help. We all want a peaceful neighborhood." Karen's voice rose. "You don't understand. I'm trying to keep order. If everyone ignores the rules, there will be chaos." Robert took a deep breath. "But your way is causing fights. That's chaos too." Karen's eyes flashed. "Watch your words." Before Robert could answer, Mrs. Clark walked by and gently interrupted. "Karen, let's not argue here." Karen nodded stiffly and left. Robert sighed. He knew this fight would not end quickly. One evening, Robert received a letter from the HOA office. It was about the $100 fine for parking violations. The letter said the fine must be paid within 10 days, or more penalties would follow. Robert felt frustrated but decided to respond. He wrote a letter explaining his position and asking for the fine to be cancelled since the rules were unclear and under review. He mailed the letter and waited. Days passed. One morning, Robert found more notes on his car, this time from Karen herself. One note said, "You are ignoring HOA rules. Stop parking illegally." Robert felt tired. This was more than just parking now. It was personal. Neighbors started to notice the tension. Some came to Robert's door to ask if he was okay. "You're brave," said Mr. Sanchez. Not many would stand up to Karen. Robert smiled weakly. "I just want to live peacefully." Mrs. Clark brought him cookies one afternoon. "Keep going, Robert. Change takes time." Robert felt grateful. Then, one morning, things took a surprising turn. Robert heard sirens outside. He looked out and saw 2 police cars near the lake. He stepped outside and saw Karen talking to the officers, her phone in her hand. Neighbors gathered, watching. Robert's heart pounded. Karen saw him and waved her phone. Robert is still parking where he should not. "I called the police again." Robert felt shocked. He walked calmly toward the officers. "Good morning, officers," he said politely. "I believe there is some misunderstanding." The officers listened as Robert explained. They checked the HOA rules again and spoke to Karen. After a few minutes, one officer said, "There is no law broken here. HOA rules are civil matters, not police matters." Karen looked angry but said nothing. The officers left. Neighbors whispered and looked at Karen with surprise. Robert felt relief but knew this was far from over. The day the police left after Karen's second call, a quiet wave of relief spread through Robert. Yet, the tension in the neighborhood was far from gone. Neighbors watched closely, some whispering about Karen's constant complaints and others wondering what might happen next. Robert knew he had to stay calm. This wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and making the neighborhood a place where people felt comfortable, not afraid. That afternoon, Robert received a message from Mr. Wilson, the HOA chair. "Robert, the board will meet next week to discuss the committee's parking rule suggestions. Your input will be welcome." Robert was grateful. He decided to prepare carefully. He wanted to explain clearly why the rules needed change, not just for himself but for all neighbors who had been confused or unhappy. In the days before the meeting, Robert went door to door, talking quietly with neighbors. Many shared their stories, some about small parking problems, others about other strict HOA rules that felt unfair. One neighbor, Mrs. Lee, said softly, "Karen once told me to remove my garden flowers because they were against the rules, even though they were beautiful and didn't bother anyone." Another neighbor, Mr. Patel, shared, "I was fined for putting a small bench on my porch. It was silly." These stories made Robert feel the problem was bigger than just parking. The HOA rules seemed too strict, and Karen's way of enforcing them was making neighbors unhappy. Robert promised the neighbors he would speak for them at the meeting. Finally, the night of the HOA board meeting arrived. The community center was packed. Many neighbors came to listen. Robert stood before the board and the crowd. His voice was steady but kind. "Thank you all for listening," he began. "This neighborhood is special. We all want it to be safe and beautiful. But rules should help us, not make us feel afraid or upset." He spoke about the parking rules. "The rules are unclear. This has caused confusion and conflict. I ask the board to approve clearer, fairer rules that work for everyone." Robert looked at Karen. She sat stiffly, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "But," Robert continued, "this is not just about rules. It's about respect and community. We need to listen to each other and work together." The room was quiet. Mr. Wilson nodded. "Thank you, Robert. Your words are important." Karen stood up. "Rules are rules. Without them, this neighborhood would fall apart." Mrs. Clark, who sat beside Karen, surprised everyone by saying, "Maybe the rules need to change if they cause this much trouble." The board members whispered among themselves. After a few moments, Mr. Wilson said, "We will take Robert's suggestions seriously. The committee will rewrite the parking rules and present them soon." The crowd nodded and some applauded. Robert felt hopeful. This could be the start of a better community. The next morning, Robert found an unexpected note on his door. It was from Karen. It read, "Robert, I do not agree with your ideas. But I respect your courage. Let's try to work together." Robert smiled. Maybe Karen was beginning to change. Over the next weeks, the committee worked hard. Robert, Mrs. Clark, Mr. Sanchez, and even Karen met often. The meetings were sometimes tense, but they talked more calmly. They wrote new parking rules. The new rules had clear signs, marked spaces, and allowed residents to request special parking spots if needed. Karen pushed hard for strict enforcement but also learned to listen. One afternoon, Karen surprised Robert by saying, "Your ideas have helped. Maybe rules do need to be clearer." Robert nodded. "Thank you, Karen. We want the neighborhood to be peaceful and fair." Karen smiled slightly. It was a small change, but it felt important. Then, a week later, Robert received a letter from the HOA. The letter said the fine for parking violations was cancelled. Robert felt a wave of relief and joy. He shared the news with neighbors, who celebrated quietly. Life slowly returned to normal. Robert parked his car by his house without fear. Karen watched but said nothing. Neighbors started to smile more, and the quiet tension faded. Robert often walked by the lake, watching the sunset, feeling grateful. He had faced a difficult challenge but learned that kindness, patience, and speaking up could change even the toughest situations. One evening, as Robert sat on his porch, Karen approached with a small box of cookies. "I made these for you," she said quietly. Robert accepted them with a smile. "Thank you, Karen. Maybe this is a new beginning." Karen nodded. "Maybe it is." And for the first time in a long time, Robert felt hope not just for himself but for the whole neighborhood. After the new parking rules were accepted and the fine cancelled, the neighborhood slowly began to change. The air felt lighter. The tension that had hung over Lakeview Estates for months started to fade. Robert noticed neighbors greeting each other more often. Some even stopped for small chats on the sidewalk. The community that had felt divided was beginning to come together again. One afternoon, Robert was tending to his small garden when Karen walked by. She stopped and watched quietly. "You have a green thumb," she said softly. Robert smiled. "Thank you. I find it relaxing." Karen nodded, then hesitated. "I know I was harsh before. I wanted to keep things in order, but I see now that I may have gone too far." Robert wiped his hands and looked at her. "It's okay, Karen. We all want what's best. Sometimes we just have different ideas." Karen sighed. "I guess I was afraid of losing control." Robert understood. Change can be scary, but it can also be good. They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet sound of birds filling the air. That evening, Robert thought about how much had changed in a few months. He remembered the first time Karen called the police on him. It seemed like a different life. But now, there was hope. People were talking again, listening, and learning to compromise. Robert decided to organize a small neighborhood picnic to celebrate the new rules and the fresh start. He talked to Mrs. Clark and Mr. Sanchez, and they agreed to help. They chose a sunny Saturday afternoon by the lake. A flyer was sent to every home, inviting neighbors to bring food, drinks, and their families. When the day arrived, the park near the lake was filled with laughter and chatter. Children played on the grass. Neighbors shared dishes and stories. Robert saw Karen talking with a few neighbors. She smiled more than he had seen before. Mrs. Clark came up to Robert and said, "This is wonderful. You brought everyone together." Robert felt proud but humble. It was everyone's effort. As the sun set, Robert looked around. The peaceful lake reflected the colorful sky. The neighbors were no longer strangers or rivals, they were a community. During the picnic, Karen approached Robert again, holding a small notebook. "I've been writing," she said quietly, "about the neighborhood and what I've learned." Robert was curious. "Would you share some?" Karen nodded and read a few lines aloud. "Sometimes, being in charge is not about control but about listening. I learned that rules are important, but so is kindness." Robert smiled warmly. "That's a good lesson." Karen looked at him, eyes softer. "Thank you for helping me see it." After the picnic, Robert and Karen started to talk more often. They worked together on small neighborhood projects, planting flowers, fixing signs, and organizing cleanups. The neighbors noticed the change. Karen's strict image softened, and Robert became a trusted voice. One day, Mrs. Lee told Robert, "It's nice to see Karen and you working as a team." Robert agreed. "It shows what's possible when we listen." But not all was perfect. Some neighbors still felt uneasy about Karen's past actions. A few whispered that she had been too harsh for too long. Robert understood their feelings. "We can't forget the past," he told Mrs. Clark, "but we can learn from it." Mrs. Clark nodded. "Yes, and the future looks better." As the months passed, Lakeview Estates became a model for other neighborhoods. The board began sharing their new rule-making process with other HOAs. Robert and Karen even gave talks about their experience, how patience, respect, and open communication can heal old wounds. One chilly autumn evening, Robert sat by his fireplace, reflecting on the journey. He realized that standing up for what was right had brought challenges but also great rewards. He was thankful for the neighbors who supported him, the lessons learned, and even for Karen, whose toughness had been a test that helped the community grow. Just then, a knock came at the door. It was Karen, holding a small pumpkin pie. "I thought you might like this," she said with a smile. Robert laughed. "Thank you, Karen. I do." As she left, Robert thought, maybe even the hardest hearts can change when given a chance. And with that hopeful thought, he looked forward to many peaceful days ahead in Lakeview Estates. The peaceful days in Lakeview Estates seemed to stretch on, and Robert felt grateful for the progress. The neighborhood was changing for the better, and even Karen seemed more open and less strict. But Robert also knew that life never stayed simple for too long. One cool morning, Robert received an unexpected call from Mr. Wilson, the HOA chair. "Robert, can you come to the community center? We have an urgent issue to discuss." Robert was curious and a little concerned. When he arrived, a small group of neighbors and board members were already gathered. Mr. Wilson looked serious. "There have been some new problems," Mr. Wilson said. "Some residents are unhappy with the new rules. A few feel the changes are not strict enough. We need your help." Robert nodded. "I understand. What kind of problems?" Mr. Wilson explained that a few neighbors were parking in places not allowed, ignoring the new signs. This was causing complaints and confusion again. Karen stepped forward. "People need to follow the rules if we want order. The board must enforce them." Robert looked at Karen and then at the crowd. "We must find a way to keep rules clear but also fair. Maybe we can help neighbors understand better." Mrs. Clark suggested, "What if we hold workshops? Teach everyone about the rules and why they matter." The idea felt good. Robert volunteered to help organize the workshops. Over the next weeks, Robert, Karen, Mrs. Clark, and Mr. Sanchez worked hard. They planned small, friendly meetings where neighbors could learn about the rules, ask questions, and share ideas. Robert was surprised when Karen helped a lot during these workshops. She spoke calmly, explaining the importance of rules but also listening to concerns. One workshop had a big turnout. Some neighbors who were unhappy before came with questions. Robert and Karen answered patiently. Slowly, the neighborhood started to understand the new parking system better. Fewer complaints came in, and more people felt part of the community. But new challenges were waiting. One evening, Robert noticed a group of teenagers hanging out near the community center. Some were loud and careless. Neighbors started complaining about noise and litter. Robert decided to talk to the teenagers. "Hi, I'm Robert," he said gently. "I know you like to hang out here, but some neighbors are upset about the noise. Can we find a way to keep things peaceful? The teenagers looked surprised but listened. One young man said, "We don't want to cause trouble." Robert smiled. "Maybe you can help keep the area clean and respect quiet hours." Over the next days, Robert worked with the teens. They started picking up trash and agreeing to keep noise down after 9 p.m. Neighbors noticed the change and appreciated the effort. Karen even said, "Good job, Robert. Sometimes patience is better than rules." Meanwhile, Robert continued to work with Karen on the HOA board. Their partnership had grown stronger. One day, the board faced a difficult decision. A new family had moved in and wanted to keep a small, friendly dog. But the HOA rules said no pets were allowed without permission. The family asked for an exception, explaining the dog was well behaved and important for their happiness. Karen was against it. "Rules are rules. We must keep the neighborhood clean and safe." Robert thought carefully. "Maybe we can make exceptions if pets are quiet and well cared for." The board listened to both sides. After a long discussion, they agreed to revise the pet policy. Residents could apply for permission, with clear guidelines to keep the community peaceful. The family was happy, and neighbors appreciated the fair decision. One afternoon, Robert received a letter from the HOA. It was an invitation to a special celebration. The community had been recognized for its progress and improvements. At the celebration, Robert gave a speech. "We have come a long way," he said. "From tension and fights to understanding and respect. This neighborhood shows what people can do when they work together." Karen stood beside him, smiling. The crowd applauded. Life wasn't perfect, but Robert knew the neighborhood was stronger. He often thought about how small actions, listening, kindness, patience had changed things. Karen had been a tough challenge, but together they had made a difference. That evening, Robert sat by the lake, watching the sun set. The water was calm, and the air was fresh. He felt proud not just of himself but of the whole community. He whispered softly, "We are stronger together." And with that thought, he looked forward to whatever new challenges and joys the future would bring. Months had passed since the neighborhood had faced its toughest moments. Lakeview Estates had transformed from a place full of tension and rules enforced by fear, into a community built on understanding, respect, and cooperation. Robert looked out his window one bright morning, watching children play near the lake and neighbors chatting on the sidewalks. The peace and warmth in the air were a gift he never took for granted. Karen, once the strict enforcer of the HOA's rules, had become someone many residents trusted, even liked. She had changed, just as the neighborhood had. It wasn't easy, but it was real. One day, the HOA board decided to hold a celebration to mark the new chapter for Lakeview Estates. The event was planned for the park by the lake, a place where many conflicts had started but also where the community found its healing. Robert was asked to give a speech, and he gladly accepted. He prepared his words carefully, wanting to capture everything that had happened. When the day arrived, the community center was full of neighbors, old and new. Smiles were everywhere, and the smell of fresh food filled the air. Children ran freely, playing games, while adults laughed and talked. Robert stood in front of everyone, feeling nervous but excited. "Thank you all for being here today," he began. "This neighborhood has seen hard times, but it has also seen hope. We have learned that rules are important, but kindness and respect are even more important." He looked around, seeing Karen near the front, smiling quietly. "Together, we worked through our differences," Robert continued. "We listened, we changed, and we grew. And now, Lakeview Estates is a better place because of that." The crowd applauded warmly. After the speech, Karen stepped forward. "I want to say something," she said. Her voice was softer than before. "I know I was tough. Maybe too tough. But I cared about this neighborhood. I wanted to protect it." She paused and then smiled. "Thank you, Robert, and thank you, everyone, for helping me see that protecting this place means caring for people, not just rules." Robert nodded. "Thank you, Karen. It takes courage to change." The neighbors cheered. Later that evening, Robert and Karen walked by the lake, the sky glowing with colors of sunset. "It feels good, doesn't it?" Karen said. Robert smiled. "Yes. It's a new beginning." Karen looked thoughtful. "I want to help keep this peace. Maybe even be a little less strict from now on." Robert laughed. "That's welcome news." They paused, watching the gentle waves. The days that followed were full of small moments that made Robert believe in the strength of community. Neighbors helped each other with yard work, shared meals, and celebrated small victories. Karen even started a neighborhood newsletter to share news and positive stories, replacing old complaint letters. Robert realized that the fight for fairness had become a story of friendship. One afternoon, Robert visited Mrs. Clark, who had been a quiet but steady supporter throughout the journey. "You've done well, Robert," she said with a smile. "You helped everyone see that kindness can change even the hardest hearts." Robert felt humbled. "I couldn't have done it without you all." Mrs. Clark nodded. "It's the work of many hands, not just one." As seasons changed, the neighborhood grew closer. Robert looked at the lake one morning and thought about how far they had come from a place divided by rules and fear to a place united by understanding. He knew challenges might come again, but he also knew the community could face them together. That night, Robert sat by his porch, feeling peace in his heart. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of the evening. He whispered to himself, "Sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest peace." With a smile, Robert looked up at the stars, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring.